He wakes to a sound that isn't part of the farm. Thin, needled, not wind, not coyote. A cry. The hour before dawn when the dark is thick enough to taste, when the frost turns the pasture to ground glass and the barn's tin skin clicks as it cools. He slips on his boots without socks, shrugs into his canvas coat and steps into air that smells like iron and old hay. The dog, Boone, ribby and loyal, lifts his head from the mat and gives a single warning huff. Then the cry again, sharp as a splinter. The yard light throws a cone across the packed dirt. At the edge of it, where the barn door meets the world, sits a grocery box lined with a wool blanket and a girl's denim jacket turned inside out. In the box, a newborn, face reddish as a sunset apple, fists like knots in twine, breath stuttering. A hospital band rides the ankle, blank where the name should be. Someone rubbed the baby's hair with cheap soap. Under that is the diesel smell you can't wash out. He looks for who left him. The dirt is a ledger. A pair of men's boot prints heavy, right foot dragging a little. Another set, smaller, shallow, maybe a woman's, maybe just lighter. The steps crooked like someone in a hurry. A third pattern isn't feet at all. A line where something was hauled or someone stumbled. And tire tracks, wide all-terrain, fade toward the county road. Boone noses the box and sneezes at the chemical tang. The baby's cry thins, then catches, then breaks into hiccups. He tucks the little body inside his coat against the heat of his chest. The weight is terrifyingly small. There's a note folded once and tucked under the blanket like a guilty thought. 3 words, written hard enough to tear the paper. Please keep him. He can't. He won't. He doesn't know. The first thought is the sheriff, then the hospital, then the pastor's wife, then, God help him, his own Ruth, gone 2 winters now, who kept seed packets in drawers like tiny prayers. He hears her voice anyway. People first, Caleb. The name lands before he can stop it. The baby makes a cat sound and pushes his face into the rough denim of the jacket. The cold bites through the coat and finds bone. He carries the box inside. On the kitchen table, the wood is scarred from years of meals and bills, and one ugly night he doesn't let himself replay. He finds a dish towel, heats water, warms the baby's hands between his palms the way Ruth used to do for seedlings. Boone watches, tail barely moving, eyes trying to solve a problem that has no farm answer. On the baby's ankle beside the blank band, a faint stamp blooms where a bracelet must have been. Numbers smudged, a letter F or maybe E. He calls nobody. Not yet. He stands with the receiver in his hand, thumb on the 0 that would become 911, and stares at the note until the black ink becomes river water, and he can't read it at all. Outside, out past the barn and the rusted cultivator, a truck engine coughs once, then fades. The air shifts. The farm holds its breath. In that held breath moment, he knows 2 things. Whoever set this child at his door plans to come back for something, and if he gives the boy up without knowing why, he won't sleep another night this side of heaven. Daylight comes slow and gray, showing the truth of things. The broken tooth fence at the north lot. The combine that starts only when it feels like it. The lean in the porch railing that he keeps telling himself he'll fix when the weather changes. Coffee smells like a story he wants to believe. Milk warms on the stove for the baby with a sweetness that sets him back in time so hard he has to grab the counter. He feeds with an eyedropper, cursing his big hands, counting each swallow as if counting could keep a life tethered. He is, by anyone's measure, a poor farmer. Miles of weathered posts, a house that sighs when the wind moves through it, a diesel tank that sweats dread. He barters for repairs, sells hay to neighbors who pay late, stretches feed like a hymn's last verse. The bank's letters arrive regular as crows. He reads them at the table, then folds them so tight they almost vanish. At night he leaves the television on mute just for company and falls asleep in a chair that remembers his weight too well. But the land remembers him kindly. The pasture slopes to a creek lined with cottonwoods that whisper secrets he doesn't know how to keep. The barn, older than he is, wears its age like a proud scar. Soft mornings are still kindness. Boone's tail thumps when he finishes a chore. Some days that's enough. If you're listening to this and you want to go deeper into stories like this one, hard places, small mercies, faith that aches, hit subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note and I mean that. These stories live because you carry them with you. He wraps the baby in the old quilt from the couch, the one with the crooked star blocks. He practices saying nothing. He fails. He talks to the boy anyway. "You came early," he says. "You came to the wrong door." Boone leans in to sniff the tiny foot, then rests his chin on the quilt's edge like a guard set at ease but not off duty. He makes a list on a grocery receipt. Hospital band, diesel smell, tire tracks, wide, maybe off-road. Note. He writes Ruth and crosses it out. He writes call and leaves it uncrossed. He thinks about the cannery out by the highway where new folks work odd hours, about the van he's seen after midnight rolling too slow past the crossroads. He remembers the woman at the gas station with a baby on her hip, asking if the bus runs all the way to the city, and the way the man beside her watched the parking lot instead of her face. Maybe, he thinks, maybe you didn't come to the wrong door at all. He lays the baby in a laundry basket, lines it with the softest shirts he owns, and sets it on the counter while he checks the yard daylight has made. The prints are already softening, but he kneels and reads what's left. The heavy boots went from the road to the barn and back again. The lighter steps veered toward the creek and disappeared in the brittle grass. The tire tracks cut a curve that suggests someone who knows the ruts by heart. On the barn sill he finds one thread of blue ribbon snagged on a nail, a child's ribbon, the color sun-faded to sky. He follows the lighter steps. The cold burns his nose. The creek mutters under ice. In the cottonwoods he finds a place where bark is scored by a ring. Someone held on hard. Near it, a dime store saint's medal pressed into mud, the chain broken. He rubs it clean enough to see the figure. Christopher, the one who's supposed to carry you over. He slips it into his pocket and looks up at the road thin as a string held between fields. Back at the barn, Boone's hackles rise before Caleb sees anything. A shape moves beyond the far fence. A truck, black, windows dark, parked just wrong, like a thought you don't want to admit you're having. He steps into the barn shadow and watches. The truck idles, then the engine cuts. Nobody gets out. He waits until the cold makes his teeth ache, then they start it again and roll away, slow, watching, timing, making sure. The baby sleeps with his mouth open just enough to show a pink tongue. The quiet is a hum, and in that hum something feels off. He walks the barn not like a farmer, but like a thief afraid of waking the house. Eyes low, hands gentle on things that have always been his. In the back stall, under the pallet where he stacks twine, there's a hollowness to the floor that wasn't there when he laid it himself. He pries up the board with a screwdriver, wincing at the small scream of nails. Below, in a space no bigger than a bread box, sits a metal cash tin and a cheap flip phone, wrapped in a rag that smells like bleach and gasoline. The phone is new, the plastic film still on. The tin is old, its paint scabbed off in patches. Inside are 3 envelopes of cash banded tight, a stack of photocopied IDs, and a ledger ruled by hand. Names, shifts, numbers. Beside some names, a star. Beside others, a cross. There are arrows that move people like cattle from one job to another, fields to cannery to a house he doesn't know on a road he does. He's seen enough to know this is not the kind of bookkeeping you bring to the sheriff if you want a quiet life. The phone rings before he can decide to turn it on. It rings once, stops, then rings again, an insect sound. He answers because not answering would be a choice, and he's tired of choices he doesn't understand. A man's voice calm as a pond. "You found our boy." He says nothing. The silence is thin wire, and he is careful where he steps. "You'll put him back where you found him," the voice continues. "Mile marker 19, tonight, 2 a.m. Leave him and walk away. No calls. No cops. You hear me, farmer?" Caleb wants to ask why. Who? He imagines a woman with her hands cut on barbed wire, chest hitching where milk comes in and has nowhere to go. He thinks of men whose boots drag when they walk. He makes his voice dull as he can. "Suppose I don't." The quiet on the line changes shape. "Suppose you want to keep your fence lines. Suppose you like your barn standing. Suppose you value breathing, Mr. Merritt." The name lands with weight. 2 a.m. The line dies. Boone, who hates phones, licks his wrist as if to pull him back into his body. He sets the phone down like it might bite. The note is on the table beside it. Sudden as thunder, though he doesn't remember bringing it inside. "Please keep him." Pressure makes a different kind of sound than wind. The truck on the road isn't the only thing moving. By noon, a county cruiser rolls past slow enough to count the dings in the fender. By 1, someone from the bank leaves a door hanger that reads, "We're here to help" in friendly type. By 3, a van with ladders on top slows at the mailbox and then leaves. Though he doesn't have a work order, he carries the baby in his coat. everywhere, like a contraband heart. He drives to town at dusk, the sky bruised purple. The baby strapped in the passenger seat in a borrowed infant seat he found in the church basement 3 months after the rummage sale. He goes first to the clinic. The nurse on duty looks at the blank band and the baby's stamp and sets her mouth in a line. She doesn't ask for his name. She checks the baby, gives him a formula sample and says, "If anyone asks, he wasn't here." When he looks up, she flicks her eyes toward the back door. "Don't be out late." He doesn't ask questions she can't afford to answer. Instead, he drives 2 blocks to the community center where the church keeps the food pantry. In the kitchen, a woman with a braid down her back and flour on her hands, Marisol, rolls tortillas with the mindless focus of someone who's thinking hard about something else. He doesn't know her well, but he's seen her at the cannery's parking lot, handing out sack lunches between shifts. She looks at the baby and looks at him. No flinch, no polite surprise. "You need to sit," she says. "You look like an apology." He tells her less than half. She hears more than double. When he shows her the St. Christopher medal and says creak, something in her loosens, then tightens. "There's a man," she says. "Ray Harlan. Trucks. He hires and fires with the same hand. If he called you, he knows you. If he knows you, he's already been in your barn." She wipes her hands and meets his eyes. "You can't go alone." He doesn't say he was never not alone, not since Ruth. He doesn't say he chose it. He says, "I don't see another choice." "You will," she says, "when you think like him and not like you." Outside, Boone waits in the truck, eyes on the door. The baby sleeps hard enough to make Caleb count breaths again. The town's Christmas lights, still up in January because no one has time to take them down, make shadows twitch. He drives home the long way and watches his own tail. The black truck doesn't show, which is almost worse. At home, he eats standing up. He tucks the cash tin back in the floor and wedges the pallet tight. He sets 2 a.m. at the center of his mind and builds around it. Roots, tools, places where the ground sucks at a man's boots. Strange things don't just arrive. They keep arriving. He knows now something is buried here. Not bodies, not treasure, but a system. And systems once shaken rattle the parts that look solid. The hours between midnight and 2 have their own weather. Frost needles the fence wire. The creek speaks in broken glass. He parks the truck half a mile from mile marker 19 and walks the ditch with Boone at heel, a leash looped around his wrist. The baby is not with him. The laundry basket, weighted with grain sacks and wrapped up in the same quilt, rides silent in his arms. He places the bundle in the shadow of the marker and steps back into the weeds. From here he can see the approach from both sides. He waits, body gone to ache, ears straining past cricket silence for the next sound. When it comes on a breath, a truck engine like a snore swallowed before it wakes the house. Lights off, slow, the black truck. It ghosts to the marker and stops. The passenger door opens. A man steps out, heavy boots, a baseball cap, a neck like a stump. He lifts the quilt, grunts, and sets it down again with a curse. Another man slides out from the driver's side, lighter on his feet, movements threaded with a switchblade kind of attention. "Empty," the heavier says. "Old man's not dumb," the other answers. "Just slow. Slow gets you dead," the heavy one says, and kicks the marker like it insulted his mother. They get back in and roll off. The plan was to follow them. But plans made in the kitchen fall apart in the ditch. He can't tail a truck that knows the road like a vein. He runs back to his own pickup, breath sawing, Boone loping easy beside him. On the seat, the flip phone lights. One message. He opens it expecting threat and finds an address instead. No greeting, no signature. An old feed mill outside town. Back on the road, he keeps 2 vehicles between him and the black truck when he can, and when he can't, he keeps distance and faith. The mill's shadow rises out of the flat like a ship. The truck he's following doesn't pull in. It slows, then accelerates past. He coasts by and doesn't stop, just looks. In the back lot under a security light that isn't working, another van idles. White, windows painted, the kind you stop seeing if you live here long enough. He circles, cuts his headlights and pulls up the farm road that runs behind the mill to the old irrigation ditch. There he kills the engine and listens. Voices float thin. A woman's voice, tight with a pain that doesn't make noise until it's too big to hold. A man's voice, patient like a man counting money. He leaves Boone with a whisper and belly crawls to the fence. What he sees is what he knew and didn't. People bunched beside the building, shoulders hunched against cold and each other, eyes shut against light. 3 men watch them with the bored cruelty of boys pulling wings off flies. And the smooth one, Ray Harlan, he knows it in his bones without introduction, walks the line like an auctioneer deciding what a body will bring. A woman steps forward, hair stuck to her cheeks, arms wrapped around herself. She says something he can't hear, her hands out like she's offering a piece of herself. Ray shakes his head and flicks his eyes toward the white van. She flinches like he slapped her. Caleb can't move and can't stay still. He thinks of the St. Christopher, the ledger, the blank hospital band. He thinks of the baby breathing against his chest like a bird that hasn't learned the sky. He pulls back before courage becomes stupidity. On the way to the truck, he texts the address to Marisol with 1 word. Now. He expects a lecture. He gets a promise. Coming. Home again. Dawn is a bruise that won't fade. He doesn't sleep. He reads the ledger. This time as if it were scripture in a bad translation you have to squint to understand. Names with stars are people who pay extra for protection. Crosses are people who owe. Arrows point to the cannery, the feed mill, a ranch outside the county line. One name repeats, L. Alvarez. He flips the pages back and forth until the pattern clicks. L. Alvarez transferred 3 times in 2 weeks. Moved to late shifts, marked with a cross, and then a star. A mother who had something someone else wanted and then had to buy it back. The knock on the door at 9 is 3 knuckles, steady. He opens it to find Deputy Clayton Briggs in a uniform that fits a little too tight at the pride, and a smile that aims for friendly and settles on knowing. "Mr. Merritt," he says, taking a step in uninvited. "Heard we might have a situation." Caleb leaves the door open for air and witnesses. "If that's true, I'm not the situation." Briggs eyes the laundry basket on the table, the quilt, the formula can opened like a secret. "We had an anonymous call," he says. "Said you found something you don't want to lose. It happens, country folks mean well, don't understand the process. Process like trucks at the old mill?" The question leaves his mouth before he can put a leash on it. Briggs's eyes flick, fast. That alone is its own answer. "Careful," Briggs says, and the smile slides off. "You don't want to start seeing things that aren't your business." "Man left threatening messages on my phone," Caleb says. He holds up the flip. "Seems I've got business whether I asked or not." Briggs's gaze sits on the phone like a weight. He pulls a card and writes a number on the back. "If he calls again, you call me direct," he says, and his voice says a different thing. "Call me only. In the meantime, custody goes through proper channels. You hand the child over or things get complicated. Complicated like my barn catching fire?" The question costs him. It is a dare. He hates himself for the thrill in it. Briggs's face doesn't change. "It would be a shame," he says, "if your insurance were to lapse at the wrong time." He tips his hat like a man in a movie and leaves. After he goes, Boone noses the door closed and grumbles low. Caleb texts Marisol again. "Deputy's crooked," he writes. "Harlan?" "Yes," she replies. 2 hands on same throat. He breathes through the urge to smash something he can't fix. Then he moves. He scans the ledger, every page, using the old printer scanner he bought for tax season and never learned to love. He uploads nothing. He doesn't trust the air, but he prints copies and stuffs them into feed sacks, and the hollow of the porch post and under the spare tire. He writes "if something happens to me" on one copy with names of 2 people he trusts. Marisol, the pastor who still brings him hot dish when he forgets to show up for church. By late afternoon, Marisol pulls into his yard in a Corolla that shouldn't still be moving and is. In the back seat sits a woman with hair cut to the quick, eyes slit against daylight. She holds the baby like he is a border she has crossed. "Lucia," Marisol says, voice a little fierce to hide its breaking. "We don't have long." Lucia doesn't look at Caleb first. She looks at Boone, who reads the room and lies down, ears forward. Then she looks at the quilt, at the formula, at the St. Christopher medal on the table. She lifts it with a finger and nods. "Where?" she asks, meaning where he found it. He points. "Cottonwoods at the creek." Her mouth tightens. "They took me there," she says. "Said I had to leave him. Said a good family would find him. Said if I made a noise they'd take us both and sell us to people who don't ask names." She swallows the next words whole. He will not be back with them. Clarity is a hammer. It hits square. He doesn't tell her he can't protect anything. He says then we make it impossible. They stage the farm the way you brace a house for a storm. Not with boards on windows, but with knowledge laid in the right places. The lane's ruts are deep by design. A truck that takes them fast will bottom out at the cattle guard. The south gate's hinge is greased and swings easy. The north gate drags and will slow a man who doesn't know to lift while he pushes. The barn's floodlights work, but the breaker is under a shelf only Caleb reaches without a stool. Boone knows the whistle that means go, and the whistle that means stay. They don't have weapons beyond a single old shotgun, 2 flares, and the bone-deep stubbornness of people who have already lost more than they can afford. At dusk, he drives the Corolla to the pastor's parsonage with Lucia, and the baby hidden under a pile of towels, a lie he hates, that he's just dropping off spare parts for the food pantry's broken freezer. The pastor doesn't ask, just holds the door wider and stands between them and the road until they're inside. Marisol stays with them, a hand on Lucia's back like a vow. Caleb and Boone go home to wait. He doesn't have to. He could leave, drive to the next county, call a state number, set fire to the ledger and his life and start over as a man with less to carry. He sits instead in his kitchen with the shotgun across his knees and the flip phone turned over so the screen can't surprise him. If terror were a thing he could plant, he'd plant it now, let it sprout, thin it in the spring. It's not. It's a weather you endure. They arrive after full dark. 2 trucks, 1 black, 1 white, and a county cruiser that hangs back like a chaperone pretending innocent. Headlights off, engines low. He kills the barn's lights at the breaker and lets the night swallow the place. The trucks creep forward, tires cracking frost, breath from their exhausts ghosting. He whistles once. Boone slides off the porch and vanishes. Ray Harlan steps out of the black truck with the easy confidence of a man whose confidence has been rewarded. He carries no visible weapon. His hands are in his jacket pockets like he's out for a smoke. Deputy Briggs stays by his cruiser, hand at his belt. "Evening, farmer," Ray calls like a neighbor. "I've come for what's mine." Caleb steps into the doorway and keeps the shotgun low, not pointed at anyone, pointed at the ground where shot won't bounce. "You've misplaced your pronouns," he says. "Nothing here answers to you." Ray laughs. "You've got heart," he says. "Heart is expensive." "Pays due then," Caleb says. His voice is steady. In his chest, everything is not. Ray nods at the white truck. 2 men pour out, shadows with hard centers. They fan toward the barn. Boone gives a low growl from somewhere to the left. 1 man slows, looks down. Boone slips behind him and nips his calf, quick and sharp, a reminder that skin is fragile. The man swears and stumbles right into the cattle chute's open mouth. Caleb yanks the rope he set on the hinge. The gate swings. The man is caught. He thrashes. The chute holds. Ray's smile flattens. "Cute," he says. "You planning to hold off the tide with baling twine and dog tricks?" "Been using less," Caleb says. He takes 1 step back into the barn's shadow. Another man moves to flank. Boone breaks right. Caleb whistles the high note that means run them. Boone goes for boots, not flesh. Men don't move well when their feet are questions. Deputy Briggs finally moves, like a man who realizes he has to earn his cut. He steps forward, hand dropping to his sidearm. "Enough," he says, and his voice is bigger than the man wearing it. "This is law business now, put the gun down." Caleb eases the shotgun to the barn floor, kicking it back into the dark with his heel. He raises his hands, but not empty. In his left, he holds the flip phone. In his right, a flare. "Law business?" he says. "Let's make it law." He cracks the flare. It hisses to life, painting the yard in a witch light. Shadows leaping up the barn like alley cats. Faces change shape. Men pause, not because of the light, but because of what it means. Attention. He tosses the flare into the feed trough he filled with diesel-soaked rags that afternoon, and the trough becomes a line of fire, silly and showy, and exactly enough to make a man think twice about crossing. The phone vibrates. On the line, a recorded voice begins to speak into 3 numbers at once. The state investigator Marisol found, the hotline the pastor trusts, and every overlapping frequency on the cheap farm radio in the kitchen. He recorded Ray's earlier call and Briggs's threat and set the phone to broadcast when a code word was texted. Marisol's doing, not his. Now the yard is a stage and the show is loud. "Ray Harlan," he says, and the name, said plain, is suddenly a fact instead of a rumor. "Clayton Briggs." Deputy Briggs pulls his gun, then hesitates. The calculus of public light and private loyalty not solving fast enough. Sirens are far off yet, but not far enough. The caught man in the chute bucks and roars. The other man looks at him, looks at the fire, looks at Ray. Ray doesn't rattle easy. He takes 2 steps into the light, his face clean as a salesman's. "You think noise changes gravity?" he says. "Gravity is money. Gravity is fear. Gravity is how long a body can hold its breath. You run a farm, you know gravity wins. Sometimes not, a voice says from the dark behind him. Marisol steps out with a camera raised, the pastor behind her with a phone up and a prayer on his lips that sounds like determination. Behind them from the road, a second siren wails, higher, closer. The white van's driver curses in a language any man understands and moves for his door. Boone beats him there, plants himself and shows a line of teeth he seldom uses. The man looks at his hands as if they've betrayed him by shaking. Ray's eyes narrow. You just made enemies you can't afford. I already couldn't afford my life, Caleb says. Turns out that's freeing. Briggs tries to salvage the story. He lifts his badge like a shield. This man is interfering with an investigation, he says to the night, to the phones, to the sirens. Stand down or be detained. The state cruiser arrives cruel fast and breaks in a burst of gravel like a promise. A trooper steps out. Woman, eyes that miss nothing, jaw set to duty, and takes in the shape of things. Fire, trap, men, camera, dog. She doesn't know the backstory, but she knows a scene curdled. Her hand rests on her weapon professionally. Hands where I can see them, she says to everybody, which is the smartest thing in the yard. Ray weighs options. He lifts his palms. Briggs's badge looks less like a shield now and more like what it is, a tin star a man can lose. He puts his gun on the hood of his cruiser with a clatter that sounds like an ending. For a second, no one moves. Then motion returns to the world. The trooper cuffs the man in the chute first because he's loudest. Another unit arrives. Someone kills the trough fire with a shovel and water from the horse tank. The night's temperature drops 3 degrees when the flames go down. In the porch lights hum, the ledger feels heavy in Caleb's jacket. Heavier when he hands it to the trooper and says, "It's all in there. Enough to start." Ray's eyes meet his as they put him in the back of the cruiser. There is nothing in them, and then there is everything. A promise, a curse, a grudging respect for a man who picked a side and didn't fall off it. Boone leans against Caleb's leg like he's the post that holds the gate. Caleb's knees finally tell the truth of their age. He sits on the steps because standing is a choice too far. Above the barn, the stars mind their business. The farm breathes out. Morning comes gold-edged and ordinary. The yard looks like any yard after a long night. Mud tracked, a shovel out of place. A flare's ash like a spent prayer. The trooper, Sergeant Klein, he learns, drinks his bad coffee like it's good because it's hot, and writes in a notebook without flourish. She takes the ledger, the flip phone, the St. Christopher, the story. She leaves him a case number and a nod that means, you did a thing that counts. By noon, the pastor's wife has made a pan of eggs the size of a hope. The baby, no longer the baby, now named by his mother Mateo, sleeps in a laundry basket that has become a cradle by stubborn consensus. Lucia sits at the table with her hands flat on the wood like a woman holding on to land she finally owns. She doesn't cry. She breathes. And for the first time the breath goes all the way down. Bank letters still exist. The combine still refuses to pick a mood. Winter will still do what winter does. But something in the house has shifted the way a foundation shifts, and then settles sounder. He didn't know you could change the load-bearing walls of a life without tearing the whole thing down. Turns out you can, if you're willing to live in a mess for a while. Marisol brings news in plain words. Arrests. Warrants. The deputy suspended pending investigation. The feed mill's backlot taped off. The white van impounded. Men questioned who suddenly remember everything. The cannery posts a sign about compliance that no one reads. The town pretends it didn't know what it knew because that's how towns survive themselves, and then, slowly, a few more people stop pretending. He walks the fence with Boone that afternoon and fixes the draggy north gate because it no longer has to drag. He hangs a new hinge he bought 2 years ago and never learned how to justify installing. The metal shines like a small defiance. At the creek, he nails a St. Christopher medal, one he bought with cash at the feed store to replace the one the trooper has into the cottonwood bark. Not because he's superstitious, but because he likes the idea of blessing the middle of things. He touches the tree and feels the cold gone from it. Later, Lucia stands in the doorway and watches him tie twine around nothing, just to have his hands do something. "Thank you," she says, in English ironed flat by effort. He shrugs, suddenly shy in his own skin. "You did the hard part." She shakes her head. "You opened your door." He doesn't tell her about the part where he almost didn't. He doesn't tell her about Ruth's voice. He says, he'll need a doctor regular, papers, a lawyer, people who know forms. We have people now. Marisol says from behind her, and the way she says we lands like a new fence line drawn in good ground. He looks at the field behind the barn and sees not rows, but possibilities. Space for a small greenhouse, for a chicken run, for a shed that stores more than regret. The pantry needs eggs. The church needs work for hands that want to be paid. A man can build a thing that feeds people and doesn't ask too many questions. A farm can be an answer when the world won't. He doesn't talk much about faith anymore. Words wore thin. But that night, when the house is quiet and Boone snores like a soft engine and Mateo dreams with his mother's hand on his back, Caleb sits at the table and thanks whoever is listening for a dawn that came after a very long night. He asks, not for money or mercy, though both would be welcome, but for sight enough to see what needs doing next. If this story moved you, there's another one waiting. Stories of hard country and the people who carry each other across it. Click through to the next video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. We build this thing together, you and me. One dawn, one door, one decision at a time. Sem achismo, sem ruído. Só o que importa, o preço e a decisão.